So it was brought to my attention that a few weeks ago, Lauren Chen, who uses the moniker Romy Millennial, or has used it for the longest period of time, and I will refer to her as such throughout this video, made a video about incels and mgtow. And at first I thought I would make just a straight-up response video in a classic fashion. Not that I personally have the habit of making these types of videos. I don't. And anyone who's been with me for a long time would know that. But I thought it over, and I don't want to make a traditional, conventional response video. Instead, I want to embed Roman Millennial within the greater context of something I've observed for several years now, and that is the topic of the female opportunist. And so the purpose of this video is to divine the ultimate intention and the possible benefit, if any, of some of these female opportunists. And Romy Millennial is a great example of a YouTube female opportunist. And there's several reasons for this. Now, this might sound like an ad hominem on my part, but I'm simply being descriptive in what I'm about to say. She has no original material or original thought to my mind. I've never heard anything new from her or interesting. I've heard nothing creative from her. She actively shills products that seem pretty random, and she doesn't hesitate at all to do so. And essentially what she does in her entire channel is the regurgitation of talking points stemming from people who are smarter than her and more experienced than she is. Well, what does that make her? It makes her an opportunist. All the while, her Patreon, and I suspect she makes somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000 a month on Patreon, is filled with thirsty donors and thirsty patrons who are not following her, you could say, for the right reasons. And that is the main point of this video. There's been a lot of discussion as to whether or not female presentation is effective in getting across ideological points or trying to convince people. And I think it's a very difficult question to explore because we don't actually know what's going on in people's minds. But for all his faults, a guy like Jordan Peterson actually is convincing people with his words and thoughts. You might disagree with him 90%, 100%, 80%, 70, 60, 50, or you might largely agree with him and only disagree with a few things. But the point I'm making here is that a guy like Jordan Peterson convinces people with his arguments, with his thoughts, and a synthesis of the many things that he has learned over the years. A synthesis of knowledge, if you will. And the same is true of just about any person who's managed to get people on their side. Now, I'm not somebody who's trying to get people on my side, and frankly speaking, I think I'm pretty average. But I have, at least in my YouTube career, made an attempt to be creative at times, and to think of alternative ways of looking at things. I'll reference the now ancient, truly ancient video on Fisherian Runaway in the context of modern men and women, or looking at male and female dynamics in terms of metaphor or other ways that use evolutionary psychology and biology as a blueprint to help explain things in greater detail. In short, whatever my mediocrity might be, and I assure you there's great mediocrity in me, I do make an effort to at least attempt to be original and analytic. On the other hand, my point of reference here, Romy Millennial, and you could really substitute her for anyone else who is a female opportunist on YouTube, simply regurgitates the same thing over and over and over. Which is not to say that there aren't men on YouTube who do that, but obviously the men who do that tend to be noticeably less successful. So the question I want to pose here is the following. If people are gravitating towards a certain line of thought or an ideology, are they doing it for the right reasons? The right reasons being defined here as they are convinced by the talking points and they find that the talking points line up well with reality and seem to make sense, or as in the case of Romy Millennial, is it simply the case of thirsty men throwing plaudits at her merely because she's a decent-looking female who regurgitates talking points of her cognitive betters? The reality is that getting people on board with something does require actual conviction, and therefore being an admirer of somebody like Romy Millennial or any other type of e-thought is not really driving home whatever message is being attempted to be driven home ultimately. just a bunch of thirsty guys admiring a female for talking points that they may well appreciate, but ultimately not talking points that they represent. In the case of Romy Millennial, she has firmly established herself as a kind of Sargon, right-of-center conservative, or what have you. That is a faction that she's aligned herself with, and it's actually reasonably intelligent on her part to do so, because the milquetoast right-of-center allows you to be somewhat judgmental, but not too judgmental. It allows you to say things that are outside the range of perhaps normedom or normal conversation, but at the same time not too edgy. And so there's a degree of flexibility, all the while maintaining the position to recuse yourself from discussions that are viewed as too extreme or too dangerous or what have you. So it's a good position she's put herself in. And here's the thing we all know from history. Women are, in general, more loyal to the opportunities given them than to ideals or principles. And so it pertains to this aspect of the video that I wanted to emphasize in the beginning, the nature and the benefit of female opportunists. I think ultimately female opportunists don't really get people on board, not in any genuine sense. And to the extent they do get people on board, they get the people on board for all the wrong reasons. Compare and contrast that with a man who's put a lot of thought and energy into a video or content, who manages to capture you, not through your dick, not through your libido, but captures your mind, and you are slowly convinced of the correctness of the position, or at very least, the insights that he's offering you. It's a completely different thing. It's apples and oranges. Perhaps it's oranges and quail. That's how different it might be. So I don't think the contribution of e-thoughts or female opportunists is a particularly useful one, although obviously they enjoy basking in their own glory. Concerning Romy Millennial, there is the matter of her video. Her video was an absolute clusterfuck, without a doubt. I saw the comment section, and it was strewn and littered with comments of people who would preface the comment with something along the lines of, normally I support you, I think you're great, but you're wrong on this one, or something like that. It was essentially an opinion piece made by a makeup-caked, makeup-laden girl in her 20s who is engaged to somebody to man up. That's basically the argument she was making. Man up, go to the gym, make money. We've all heard this before. It was a very poor analysis of incels, and an even poorer analysis of mgtow. There is a distinction, by the way, in case Romy Millennial checks this out, not that she would. I am, of course, beneath her concern, and I'm not very profitable to address for that matter. On the matter of incels, there are certain realities that people need to come to terms with. And the way she was painting the picture in her video, one got the impression that every incel is like Elliot Rodgers. They're all murderous, they're all violent, they're all just whining all day. That's definitely not my impression based on the cursory investigation I've made of that community. They're simply men, not all young, but mostly young men, who have had to come to terms with certain realities. I'll give you a very harsh example of a guy I've seen making comments. He describes himself as being in his mid-20s, small of frame, and only 5'3". Now, what is that guy supposed to do? Is he supposed to man up? He can hit the gym, I guess. He can make lots of money. But the best case scenario would be that him making money would allow him to afford a prostitute or two. He'd almost certainly never get the emotional or sexual intimacy that he craves, because, let's be honest, life is unfair, and he's been dealt a very poor hand. And it is absolutely dishonest on the part of people like Romy Millennial, or Joe Rogan, and I'll get to that in a bit, or Jordan Peterson, to claim that guys like that have a legitimate shot if only they man up and do the right thing. I've heard this argument a million times. I'm sick and tired of it. People like Romy Millennial will tell guys like that that they have a perfectly even chance and all they need to do is work on themselves. Likewise with guys who have hideously disproportionate facial symmetry, poor cheekbone definition. I mean, yes, you can lose weight, but if your shape is that of an oval or an egg, you're kind of screwed. Position of eyes, jawbone, all of these things, facial symmetry and general proportions. There's not much you can do about that. Now, of course, these things can be distributed in different ways, and some guys can come out better than others. But the reality is that genetics and the hand you've been dealt plays an enormous role. And of course, you're just left to work with what you've been dealt. I used to work out religiously, and there are a number of reasons why I don't do that anymore. But I certainly can get a sense of why someone wouldn't bother. I have a pretty small frame, and though at my best I was fairly fit, I was never an impressive figure by any means. And that's because I have absolutely shitty weightlifting/bodybuilding genetics. Not the worst in the world, but pretty far down there. I am not a natural-born athlete. I never have been. The idea that there's an infinite flexibility, even if you're severely disadvantaged by nature's hand, is laughable. And so it would take a lot more bravery and courage on the part of people like Romy Millennial and others like her to say, yes, life sucks, you got the bad hand. But she's not going to do that. She's a decently attractive female that makes herself a lot more attractive, caked in layers of makeup. But at the end of the day, she's still in a much better position than the men that she's talking down to. And, of course, in that video, she makes mention of Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. And this, of course, buttresses and reinforces my original point that she has no original thought. To back up her point, she points to her mentor, her Lord and Savior, Jordan Peterson, to talk about how these types of men need to become men, neglecting the fact, of course, that Peterson did speak of enforced monogamy in that context. Now, what about mgtows, who, quote-unquote, claim they don't need women? It's a highly diverse community. If you want to even call it a community, I wouldn't do that, but rather a highly diverse group of men who all have their different thoughts on things. And mgtow, as many people know in the audience, is highly divided, to boot. You have people who religiously follow Sandman, whom I can't stand, people who like my content more, people who like Barbarossa's content more, and people in between who listen to both, apparently, although I personally cannot fathom why anyone would want to listen to me and Sandman, because we're so different, and we have a mutual loathing for each other. But the point I'm trying to make here, obviously, is that there's no uniformity in mgtow. And one of the glaring things that Romy Millennial in that video, that awful video, overlooks is the legal system. The whole man up, get married thing. Did she mention once in that video anything about divorce and the risks? Absolutely not. Because if she had done that, she would have to concede that at the very least there are some valid points to be made in mgtow circles concerning that. And if she were really an advocate for competition, she would certainly remove the government's heavy hand from marriage and mating rituals. She would say, this is a really bad thing. The courts shouldn't be involved in divorce. The government shouldn't be involved in mediating and mitigating marriages and divorces and children. That should be between the two people. But she doesn't do that, and I think we all know why. The reality of the matter is the market, the sexual market, is very much rigged now. Another point she doesn't really mention in that video that I will drive home here is how these sexual dynamics has changed. She talks about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, which is largely true, and then subtly claims it's not really true. The matter of fact here is that the sexual marketplace dynamics have fundamentally changed largely due to the internet, largely due to social media, largely due to applications such as Tinder, largely due to the expanded mating market where women can ogle and gaze upon very high-status men and lose sight of what's actually attainable and reachable. She didn't offer the smallest bit of critical thought regarding that. 60 years ago, there wasn't this division. There weren't huge swaths of men locked out of the mating game. Now, I, of course, made a video about this and related topics in the Mean Shall Divide Us, fairly recent video. But this is something that people aren't paying attention to. Increasingly, it's becoming that polarized. And a guy like Jordan Peterson actually knows that. And even Joe Rogan sort of dimly recognizes that. But this Lauren Chen, this Romy Millennial, has not a clue, apparently. Now, to be fair, I don't think she's that stupid. She was making a video, an opinion piece about her own worldview, pretending she knows what it's like to be a low-status male, pretending she understands the sexual market. And my favorite bit about her video, gentlemen, was her complete negligence in not mentioning hypergamy, marrying up, as if that's not a vital part of the equation of the 80-20 rule, the fact that women will try to marry evenly across and even better upwards. And this is anecdotal, but I want to add something in this context. I was recently at a location that has the habit of renting out space for the purpose of weddings. And I witnessed several weddings during my time there. And I noticed, very strangely, or perhaps not so strangely, that Many of the grooms were decent-looking guys who were slender, or at least in average shape, but their brides were obese troglodytic monstrosities, grossly overweight to put it euphemistically, but in most cases legitimately obese. And this is something I've seen on the internet as well. Because of the nature of the 80-20 rule, and because of the new sexual dynamics out there, what you're seeing is men who are 5s and 6s and maybe even 7s in some cases settling for less than what would be qualifiable in terms of assortative mating. Assortative mating being the principle that like tends to attract like and like tends to seek out like. But you don't see that very much anymore, or at least it's becoming rarer and rarer. And why is that? It's because of the 80-20 rule. It's because of social media. It's because of the sexual stratification of the mating market. And so these 6s say, why not? I'll settle for a 2 or 3. Yeah, she's hideous. Yeah, she's obese. But at least I can have children with her. At least I can stick my dick in something. So there is a complete distortion of the mating market that Romy Millennial doesn't address at all. And that's the point. Even fat, obese, unattractive women can still score higher than their actual score. I saw at this establishment legitimate 2s, 3s, and 4s scoring 5s, 6s, and 7s, several points up on the SMV scale, and certainly enough to satisfy their hypergamous urges because, let's be honest, they're not going to get that much better than that. But again, totally neglected, not mentioned. And so as I draw this video to a close, it's pretty obvious to me that Romy Millennial's video was not well researched, not really looked at the talking points of the manosphere. She's not really investigated these things. And of course, she doesn't really care. And why? Because she's a YouTube opportunist under the label of liberalist or right of center, trying to make as much money as possible before she checks out of the market or the market gets shut down. It's that simple. There's nothing more to it. She's not really there to understand things. She's there to parrot things smarter people have said before her. And with that said, I don't know if I have anything else to say on the matter. I think we should always be very circumspect and very cautious around these female opportunists. Whatever faction or sector they claim to represent, we need to be cautious about that. And this video, although in a technical sense it wasn't a flop because she got more likes than dislikes and it got sufficient views, I think it was encouraging to see that in the comment section this girl was really put in her place because she didn't have a clue what she was talking about in that video. Anyway, I don't want to belabor this point, but I thought a formal response, point by point, would be silly because the video doesn't deserve that, and I wanted to bring this into the bigger, broader picture of the discussion on female opportunists and what they actually bring home, what they actually deliver, which by my reckoning isn't very much at all. Gentlemen, take care, and if I'm still alive, I will check you out soon. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.